Now, I'm going to shift to digital home bases, and this is really when we talk about how you actually create something like Google Classroom. It says Google Classroom here, but it can be any function, any tool, Canvas, Blackboard, but how do you create a digital home base that's really effective and easy to use? And I'm going to talk about some core principles, and I'm going to show you some examples. So, first things first, when you're managing an effective digital home base, we have to continue to keep it simple and be so explicit with directions, it's almost comical. When I used to run my own class through Canvas, it was amazing how important it was to be so explicit with instructions. And that was when I was in the classroom and could actually address questions, and they still came in frequently. Now you're in a position where you have limited access to your students, so your instructions are incredibly valuable. If they aren't clear, if you're not being incredibly explicit, kids are going to run into issues, and when that happens, they're very likely to deflate and give up. It is far easier to give up on distance learning than it is to give up on in-person learning because there's less pressures around you to stay engaged. So explicit instructions are key. Now, the second one might be a surprise to folks, and I think it's a really, really important point. Consider organizing your content by weeks. And I'll show you in about a moment what I mean. But back when I taught using Canvas in the in-person setting, I would organize my content by units. So kids would see full units and be able to access lesson by lesson. But if you haven't noticed yet, the quarantine structure, distance learning, people are having trouble understanding what day it is. Everyone's talking about how the only days of the week are today, yesterday, and tomorrow. So understand that the more you can create time structure for kids and families, the better. So consider shifting to a week model instead of a unit model, and then be very clear about what resources are necessary within each week. Lastly, use a consistent numbering system or a naming system. So you'll notice here I always use the same structures here for each week. This one is video, assignment, office hours, mastery check, extension. This one is Edpuzzle video, classwork, office hours, mastery check. Every single week you're going to see the same exact naming structure appear so that kids know exactly what the expectations are and aren't caught off guard. For many folks, this might say lesson 1, lesson 1.2, lesson 1.3, whatever it is, just stick with it so you stay consistent. I said last thing, but there's one more. Just know that the platform doesn't actually matter. I have trained with the Modern Classrooms Project and my team about 300 educators across every platform there is. Everything from Schoology to Google Classroom to building your own organic Google Sites to Canvas. And understand that while they are all different in design and they all have some slightly different functionality, at its core, they are virtually the exact same tools and structures, and they accomplish everything you need for distance learning. And to show you what I mean, I'm actually going to just show you two samples right now. So I'm shifting from my PowerPoint presentation to a sample Google Classroom here. So this is a sample Google Classroom I made for some math class content that I would have taught back a couple years ago. First of all, if you do use Google Classroom, really just don't use the stream. The stream is like social media. It's like verbal vomit. Ignore it. So really, it's all about the classwork section. So when you're in classwork, I've organized this just how I would in a distance learning setting. So I'm going to show you first what it would look like if I wasn't doing distance learning. So if I wasn't doing distance learning, this is what my unit would look like. You'll notice it's an entire unit, crime and correlation. It tells you every single lesson. And when I click on a lesson, it has a bunch of stuff here. So I actually would click on this hyperdoc, and in this hyperdoc, it would take me to another location. And in this hyperdoc, it would provide video, guided notes, assignments, a whole bunch of stuff all embedded here. But this was under the conditions that I could still be with my students and address questions. I encourage folks to consider shifting from a unit design like you see here to a week model. So this would be 1 week of distance learning in my class. And you notice instead of one lesson having a bunch of content in it, each individual tab has its own information. This is an Edpuzzle video for students to watch. This has the classwork with instructions. This has a link to a Microsoft Teams or a Zoom for office hours, and there's a link to a mastery check here for students to show what they've understood. Big shift here, unit model versus week-long model. This is specific to distance learning and valuable. Now, I showed you here what it looks like in Google Classroom. I also said that all these platforms are the same. Look how similar it looks when I shift to a sample Canvas. This is my sample Canvas classroom. Literally looks almost the exact same. Again, organizing it by week as opposed to using a unit model where you cover everything in one unit. This is just exactly 1 week, and then you get to do a new week each and every time. So that gives you a little bit of a flavor of what I mean by managing a learning management system. You should also notice that it's incredibly simple in design. It's very easy to follow. A parent could open it and see exactly what needs to get done in a week. And if you're a child and you started the week's work but haven't finished it, it's easy to go back and know what you have and have not